this time round we're going to look at adding Nginx into our container. But just before that, I thought it might actually be good to enable caching by web browsers for content that is returned from our Lambda. So at the moment, when we request our static app from Lambda, if we go and inspect the network stack in our web browser, we can see that every time I refresh it, everything's downloaded every single time. So there's no localized caching in the web browser. So we can address that by configuring a last modified header. So I thought just before we do the Nginx, we'd go and do that. So over here with our Lambda function code, let's go and add that header, which is just last dash modified. And we need to give this a value. So let's have a look at our file. Given that we're getting the file from our file system, we can actually ask the file system about the modified date on that particular file, and that way if we update it and make any changes as we go, this will update and reflect for all web requests from Lambda as well, which is nice and handy. So let's go and add that. So we'll define a new constant and we'll just call it file modified date. Okay, we'll ask file system.stat to give us some details. So what do we want to get it from? Our file path, and then we're going to get a set of properties back for this file. So let's then we'll end up with a stat, and we want that to be stat.mtime is the property from the file system, and we'll just want to make sure that that's a web safe string. So let's convert that to UTC string. Yep, that looks right. We'll terminate that line. And that means now we can just add that in. Whoops. So let's do that. File modified date. Okay, and that's our last modified header. We probably don't need any logging in this case because it's just to do with the files that we've got within the container image itself. So let's give that one a go and see how things work. So let's have a look at our changes. So we've just added that header and we're awaiting file system response for that file, extracting the modified statistic from it. Cool, sounds good. Adding last modified header to Lambda. Alrighty, and we can build that. And we'll push it to our ECR repository. Oh, but we're not authorized, so let's sort that out. We can authorize our local Docker using the makefile. I'll try the push again. There we go. Excellent. All right, now let's deploy that. Okay, so this is going to update Lambda to use that latest image. And once that's gone through, we should be able to then inspect our headers and see that there's some local caching occurring. Okay, update complete for Lambda. The stack looks complete. Let's come back over here, that's finished. Refresh, and again. There we go, and we can see that it was retrieved from memory cache this time. So now we've got local caching. If we hard refresh, we're downloading everything again. Standard refresh, or I can click up here, we can see it's in memory. So that's our last modified header working as expected. So now we're getting correct caching on the client side. So now we're going to move back to our Docker file and we're going to install Nginx. So this version of Linux is the Amazon 2023 flavor. So in this one, they've moved over to the DNF package manager from Yum. So let's install Nginx, and we'll do that with DNF. The command's much the same as what you would do with Yum, just a different file. So Yum install, yes, Nginx, sorry, DNF install that is. And we want to also clean up the cache that we've downloaded. And then this way our layer is going to be far more compact. We won't have the DNF repository cache hanging around. Excellent, alrighty. So that'll give us Nginx. Now we're going to need to configure Nginx to serve our artifacts the way that we want it to. So in order to do that, I'm going to copy in, I've got a copy here of the standard Nginx config. So let's create a new file. Try that again. New file, nginx.conf. And we'll drop in that plain file. So that's the basic starter file for Nginx. Now, we need to configure a few things because we're running inside a container. We're not using syslog or anything like that. Let's change where our logs go to. So error log, let's set that to standard error, dev standard error, and we're going to set our access logs to be on standard out. So they'll be defined down here under the server definition. There we go. And we'll send that one to dev standard out, and we'll keep main. Perfect, that's good. Alrighty, so listening. So we want this to listen on a particular port. For simplicity, let's make it a high port, and we'll use 8080. 80 itself is fine on local machines, but let's go with 8080 for our server. We don't need IPv6, so we'll drop that. And we are going to set the path so that it serves files from our static location. So the root static, if you remember, that's where we copy our files into. If we jump back into this Docker file, we copy into /static. So that pretty much should cover us for the Nginx configuration. We're not using a lot of this other stuff, so default pages, TLS. So if you need to set up TLS, please configure this, but for this example, we're just going to use plain text listening on port 80. Okay, let's go and copy this file into our Docker image so that we have it ready to go. Question is, what's more likely to change? Are we more likely to change our Nginx config or the Lambda function? I'm thinking probably the Lambda function at this point, so let's put it above that. So we need to copy in source nginx.conf, and we'll stick that into etc nginx.conf. So that's the location inside the container, the default location of the Nginx file. So we want to make sure that we just override the existing one that was installed by the package. And that'll give us our initial configuration that we need. But there's a little bit more that we need to do. We need to be able to have a helper script that is going to enable us to actually start Nginx when the container starts up itself. So let's go and create another file, and we'll call this one nginx .sh. So this is going to be a shell file. So I'll give it a shebang. Bin bash, why not? Oh, missed the hash. Put the hash back in. There we go. And there's a couple of things we want to do. So one, we want to make sure that our Nginx configuration is valid. So let's put in validating Nginx configuration. So a little message there to let us know what's going on. And then we can do that with the Nginx binary itself, which is located in the USR sbin paths. So sbin Nginx and -t, we'll do our config verification, and then the next thing we want to do is actually start the server. So let's do another echo just so we've kind of got some visibility in our logs of what's happening. Starting Nginx, and that's just going to be from the same binary. And now we need to tell Nginx that it's actually not running as a system daemon. So we can do that with a global option. And we just turn that mode off. Awesome. Just make sure that file is executable. Nginx start. Cool. And we need to copy that into our Docker file. So we'll just add that into a fairly standard location. So we'll stick it into, we'll just stick it in the root. I guess we put our static files in the root. So let's copy source nginx start.sh into the root. Okay, so start file, actually, you know what, let's swap this around. So this startup script's probably going to remain exactly as it is forever and ever. We're just going to validate configuration and start Nginx itself. The configuration itself might end up changing, so we'll swap them around and do it the other way. So we're installing Nginx, we're providing a script that will allow us to start it at runtime, and we're providing our configuration. So at this point, we should be able to build it, and hopefully we'll be able to run it locally as well. So let's go ahead and build that. Okay. Now, if we're going to run it, we're going to need, I've got a couple of extra tasks that we can add into our make file. So we've got the ability in here to run our local instances of the Lambda variant. And this time round, we're wanting to be able to actually run Nginx itself locally. So I'm going to add in a couple of extra tasks. I'll just copy them from one I've created earlier, and this is going to allow us to run locally, exposing port 8080. You'll remember we set Nginx to run on that. We're disabling the entry point, and this is important because we're running inside a Lambda image. We don't want Lambda's entry point to run, and we're going to automatically clean our container up once it's finished doing what we need it for. We don't want to leave that lingering around, and then it's just going to run the version that we've just built and execute our startup script. And then we've just got a really basic curl command here that we can test to actually make sure that we can retrieve the files. So let's have a look at our make file. Okay, so we can see we've got our new Nginx commands in there. So let's run locally. And you can see our message, starting Nginx, and it looks like our config was created successfully. Fantastic. If we jump into our other shell here, we've got our local command that we can test with. So let's run that. And it looks like we've got our create React app HTML file. Excellent. And we're seeing the access logs. So something else we can actually do is open our web browser here, and we can just navigate to localhost 8080 or not. What are we doing? Spelling it wrong. There we go. And we've got our React app, and you can see it's downloaded all of the other components as well. So that's what we need to get it running locally. Now let's try and get this up and running elsewhere, or at least get it ready to run elsewhere. So we'll stop this. Okay. Just make sure. Still got a container image running. Docker stop. So what we can see here is we're not actually gracefully handling shutdown. So some future work for this might be to actually put in a trap there to make sure that we actually shut down appropriately, or at least forward that sigterm command directly to Nginx. So we'll do that one as a future improvement. For the moment, this is acceptable. So we've got our Docker file changes to install Nginx and copy in the config. So we'll take that. We've got our makefile commands that help us test things locally. Okay, and we'll commit that. So we're installing Nginx to support deployments on ECS. Okay, and now we'll build it again, given that we've actually got a new Git jar. And we will push that up to ECR. That's done, excellent. And we want to make sure that we haven't broken Lambda. So let's deploy it. And just make sure that we don't actually break anything. We'll close our local version down, jump over to CloudFormation, waiting for our change set to be created. Okay, here goes our update. Hopefully this will be fairly quick, given it's just the image backing Lambda. Okay, there we go, Lambda's been updated. Update complete. We'll just wait for the stack to come back on our console. There we go, that's successful. If we go back over to here, we should be able to request our app, and let's do a hard refresh, make sure we don't have any cached items. Excellent, so we can see our deployed Lambda instance is still working. If we jump in here and look at the resources, you'll be able to see that it's still the Lambda target group, listener, load balancer. We don't have any ECS components in here yet. And that will be the topic for the next video, where we will deploy our container image to ECS and Fargate. We'll see you in the next one.